Welcome, everyone. My name is Chris Eberle. I'm president of Anne Arundel Bird Club. It's great to see so many of our members, former members, and just people from elsewhere connecting in tonight. Um, we've had a very lively discussion here with Larry and a lot of the people who he left behind when he went to North Carolina. And I think we have what, of course, Maryland represented, North Carolina, Florida, Tennessee. Hi, Barbara, and Virginia. I don't know how many other states may be here, but I think this is one of our most geographically expansive meetings yet, and that's the beauty of Zoom. So let me just do some of the business that we need to tend to. And first off, Alan and Sue Young are on grandparent duty tonight, so they couldn't be here at the meeting, but they sent me a report. So let me just go over some of the field trip information. We've had good participation with field trips so far. We had tried to set the limit to 10, but some people came without pre-registering, which really has not been a problem. Um, Up to now, everything's been able to expand out, but I would encourage people to try to register just so we can get an idea of how many people are attending. This past month, since the last meeting, Leo Dilling led a walk at Quiet Waters. 14 people were there and 30 species. So, Larry, that hits your criteria, I guess, more species than participants. A good number of warblers and tanagers. On October 3rd, Alan and Sue led a walk at Kinder Farm Park. 43 species there, and that included 11 different warbler species. So it was getting in some good migration. On October 7th, Fred Schaefer was the leader for Wooten's Landing and Sand Roads. 44 species in that one, including a glossy ibis flyover. And on October 17, the Tates, who are on the call, led another Quiet Waters walk with 30 species seen on that one. Let's see, the annual Big Sit took place at Fort Smallwood on October 10th. There were 14 participants and 50 species. Most notably was the latest recorded sighting of a purple martin, and I'm not sure if that's the latest recorded in the state. Lynn, how do you?
Not anymore, Chris, because I think
Oh.
Jeff Effinger had one over at Black Walnut Point last weekend.
Well, up until the time of the big sit, that was the latest one. And this is interesting. I think we're seeing a lot of late records for some species here, and I'm sure that will continue. And also, they had 9 snowy egrets at the big sit. Um, so yeah, this past weekend at Swan Creek, Maryland Environmental Service, the Maryland Port Administration, Maryland Department of Transportation hosted an open house, and Anne Arundel Bird Club was represented there with Alan and Sue Young, Pete Bungay, Mana Ashley, and Linda Vichok. I see Mana here. I'm not sure if Linda's here, but thank you to all who helped with that. There were about 20 groups of visitors that came to the table that they had set up for Anne Arundel Bird Club, and they got really good feedback from the event organizers about the bird club being represented. So thanks again, and hopefully Swan Creek will be open like this once a year at least. Maybe in the future, getting back to some more regular uh, openings. Upcoming trips tomorrow is Masonville. That's already filled up. The 23rd, the Saturday, Crystal Springs, that's filled up also. 30th, Greenberry Point, that is also filled up. This is a good sign. People want to get out. And unfortunately, we're filling up on these trips because we have to limit it to a certain number. November 7th, Kinder Farm Park, that is a Sunday. There are spaces left on that. November 11th is Chesapeake Bay Environmental Center, and the 18th of November, Conquest Nature Preserve. And Conquest Nature Preserve, isn't that where there was a forktail flycatcher a few years ago, or maybe scissortail? So that should be a good one. So birds of note in the area, and as often happens, I got there about half a day late to see the Kirtland's warbler. I don't know how many of you were able to get out to see that at Swan Park. When I was there, I met a couple. They had British accents, so I don't know if they were visiting or here, but they were looking for a park when they were getting off the highway, and went to areas that had lots of trees, not knowing Swan Park is essentially ball fields. But that should be, anyhow, with all the photographic documentation, the first accepted record of Kirtland's warbler in the state of Maryland, which is pretty exciting. And it stayed for about a week, which is really incredible. And then I think a bunch of club members hopefully got to see the forktail flycatcher that was in Pasadena. I don't know if it stayed there more than that one day. I found out about it, next day looked to see if I would go over and see it, and decided nope, there was no reports. Any other exciting reports, Lloyd?
Not too exciting, but kind of unusual, I think. Lots and lots and lots of royal terns roosting along the shore here in Beverly Triton Beach Park and on various private docks along the Road River. And when I say lots and lots, I mean in the high 10s and 20s in groups. And I don't know how many groups, but more than I ever remember seeing this time of year. I presume they're migrating through, but there seem to be quite a lot of them loafing around. Also,
Nice.
lots and lots of laughing gulls holding on who haven't moved south yet. And again, by the several hundreds along the Road River shoreline.
Nice. Anybody else have? Oh, Dawn?
Yes, I was at Bombay Hook with Delmarva birding over the weekend. I got to see the roseate spoonbill.
Great. I'm amazed at how long that thing has been there.
Well, there's only one left. There had
Okay.
been four, and there's only been one like for the past 4 or 5 days.
Great. Glad you
And
got
then
there
we
to see it.
we saw a bunch of royal terns, Caspian terns, avocets. Lots of avocets.
Great. Those are always nice. Kathy,
I
you got
have a
something?
great regular new yard bird, and I've got a pair of ravens.
Ah,
Oh.
nice.
Yeah. Last year we moved to the west part of the county, and here in Gambrels, that pair of ravens is a regular yard visitor.
Huh. Wow. Well, I wonder if they'll get picked up on the Atlas.
I don't know.
Lynn, take note of that. Any other sightings of interest? Trying to scan if somebody's waving or something. You might just have to speak up. All right. I see no
I'll
others.
speak up.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, Julia Lasher.
Yeah.
I went to Governor's Bridge on Saturday with scientists, so we don't have to depend on my knowledge. And we nabbed 43 species. We had a lot of warblers and vireos.
Great. Great.
So there we go. Beautiful phoebes. And that's it. That's all I got to say.
Okay. Well, I'm glad people are getting out. That's just great. Man, I hope we can all get out together in larger numbers sooner rather than later. But yeah, keep getting out as you can, because we all know getting out in nature is the best way to reduce stress, anxiety, all those things, which I'm sure very few of us have had any of those symptoms in the last year or so. Okay, our next program in November will be Dave Curson with Audubon Mid-Atlantic. For those that don't know, Audubon, Pennsylvania and Audubon, Maryland, DC have merged into Audubon Mid-Atlantic. So Dave Curson, who is Director of Bird Conservation for Maryland, has worked on a project. I think Dave Brinker was the other lead on it for Maryland DNR, on building a floating island in the Maryland coastal bays that had some success this past summer. So he's going to give us a talk about can floating islands save endangered seabirds in Maryland's coastal bays? Which unfortunately, I think the answer is going to be yes, unfortunately, because there's very little natural habitat left, but birds will take what we give them, it looks like. Any other comments or questions before I introduce our speaker? Well, I think a lot of you know our speaker tonight. Larry Zoller is a retired biology and environmental science teacher, taught here in Anne Arundel County for 40 years. And he's also a past president of Anne Arundel Bird Club. Larry, you're welcome to come back anytime and take on the president role again.
Oh, no. I did it a bunch of years.
And you're also a past president of Wake Audubon Society in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he currently resides. And he and his wife, Diane, have traveled to all 7 continents in search of birds, culture, and natural ecosystems. And he's also currently Education Outreach Chair for Wake Audubon Society. As I mentioned, after the talk, after we have some Q&A time, I will keep the Zoom call open for those that want to continue catching up with Larry or just generally talk about goings on. But at this point, Larry, I will turn it over to you. We're looking forward to your talk tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And if you haven't muted, there's a couple people we're picking up their sound. If you would mute, it would help. I'm here to talk about the Asa Wright Nature Center, and I know some of you have gone, and we're using it as an example of great ecotourism. And it's a story of how a few people develop an idea into a world-class ecotourism site. So what is ecotourism? It's tourism directed toward exotic, often threatened, natural environments intended to support conservation efforts and observed wildlife. Some examples could be going on an African wildlife safari, cruising the Galapagos Islands, exploring the Australian outback, a voyage to the Southern Sea and Antarctica, birding the Pantanal in Brazil, and tonight's topic, visiting the Asa Wright Nature Center in Trinidad. So let me, if those of you that have been there, you would know what I'm talking about, but you fly into Port-au-Prince in Trinidad, you get through that little delay you usually have, and you get in a couple cars and you go through quite a traffic jam through some of the cities, and then you pick a road that goes up the Arima Valley, and the road gets a little bit more challenging as it goes, and you think if we go through that bamboo guardrail, we're a goner. And we finally get up there, we're really tired, it's dark, we check into these small bungalows, and you fall asleep because you're really tired. But early in the morning, before first light, you wake up because you're charged, because something really magical is going to happen. You race down to the old plantation house, through the building and go out on the veranda. And there is a tropical jungle high up in the mountains in Trinidad, looking down toward the Rima Valley. So you go out to the edge of the veranda and you're hearing a lot of noise up in the trees, and you look up and there's a channel-billed toucan. And then screeching in come a pair of orange-winged Amazons. And then you see a crested oropendula in a flame tree, just eating away. And then your attention gets directed downward. And I particularly use this person because this is Phil Dorr, and he and I co-created this package. And he was a tremendous help, but right now he's out deer hunting. He looks down and I look down, and we start looking at all the fruit feeders and the hummingbird feeders. And there in one of the trees is a golden olive woodpecker and a purple honeycreeper and a violaceous euphonia and tropical mockingbirds and purple honeycreepers, both male and female, at a sugarwater feeder. And banana quits all over the place eating pineapple along with a green honeycreeper. And here comes a silver-beaked tanager. And there's a white-line tanager and a palm tanager, another green honeycreeper. And your head starts to spin with all the birds you've seen. And then you start to pay attention to the little guys, all these different tropical hummingbirds. And you've gotten 40 new species before breakfast. But you also can look down below the birds where the fruit and seed is dropped, and there's a red agouti. You're at Asa Wright Nature Center in Trinidad, West Indies. And the symbol bird for that nature center is the wattled bellbird, strange and beautiful. So what is the Asa Wright Nature Center? How did it happen? How did 1,500 acres of secondary and primary rainforest go into conservation and are accessible for education, tourism, and research with a sustainable footprint? Well, there's some really cool birds there, like the golden-headed manakin. And the middle picture is Asa Wright, an Icelandic woman that married a man that they moved to Trinidad because of his health and also to make a living. And they started a plantation. You can see the main plantation house right there. So where is Asa Wright? It's in Trinidad, and Trinidad is 8 or 9 miles away from the Venezuelan coast. It's so close that the Orinoco River, the sediment plume, actually muddies the water up around Trinidad. The interesting is Tobago, a little bit back, is in the shadow of Trinidad when it comes to the current. And if you're looking to snorkel, it's a much better choice. Springhill Plantation is the original plantation that made a go of it. And what you read is one person started it and ran out of money or ran out of interest and sold it to another and sold it to another. And eventually Newcomb and Asa Wright brought it. And the 3 things that they were growing that were commercial was cocoa, coffee, and citrus. I never knew that if you opened up a cocoa fruit that you'd find little Hershey squares in there, but hey, seeing is believing. But Springhill Plantation would have just been another one of the plantations. There's plenty around, but something happened that really made their plantation different. Simla Plantation was a tropical research center just a couple miles down the valley. And a famous scientist for that time in 1949, I don't remember him because I was born that year, Dr. Charles BEEBE, he was kind of like the Indiana Jones of explorers and scientists at that time. And he established a research center along with the New York Zoological Society at Simla, which is down the hill. But as they were renovating it to make it into a research center, a lot of them started staying with the Wrights for like a bread and breakfast. And it ended up being an overflow spot because it was so close that they developed a really close relationship with Asa and Newcomb. Springhill then became a researcher in birders, bed and breakfast. I just noticed when I was reviewing it today, the slide on the left, the man with the tropical shirt on and the blue hat, that's me. I didn't realize I was in the picture. There's their living room and the hallway that you would rush down to go out to the veranda. A lot of people other than BEEBE, Snow, French, Eccleberry, O'Neill, also were prominent there. They were doing research, they developed tropical guides, and some of them were pretty good illustrators, particularly Don and Jenny Eccleberry, and they helped with some of the early West Indian bird guides. Equally important is that Trinidad and Tobago had a field naturalist club that started in 1891, way before the Wrights ever arrived. And they had a tradition of really going out and exploring and learning and researching and conserving wildlife in the area. And so when the research center came, they started working for the research center and started working for Asa Wright. And I met some of the families that were prominent, particularly the Romlow family. And I always think that we have to be sensitive to the fact that the natives have done a lot of work. It's not just the people coming from the New York Zoological Society. So let's look at Asa Wright's Nature Center vision statement. Conservation of the environment through sustainable multi-use strategies, including protection of valued ecosystems, habitats, and species, the rehabilitation of degraded areas, the promotion of compatible economic opportunities, and research, education, and recreational activities for the benefit of humanity. Let's look at how that matches up with good ecotourism. Good ecotourism has a minimal impact on the local environment. It respects the local culture. It often is run by the local culture. They have environmentally friendly practices. They support conservation and research. They encourage and finance research. They have local participation in decision-making, and they have environmental education and awareness. And if you know me, I'm really big on environmental education, because what scares me is a future where the kids today don't know about birds and don't know about forests, and they don't recognize the value. And it benefits the local economy. So let's look at Asa Wright. There's the plantation house, and you can see a few little buildings dotted around. And I think the maximum number of people that can stay overnight is like 24, which keeps it small. Their dining hall is not very large because they don't have a lot of people there at one time. And it's not a lot of people flushing toilets, not a lot of people, tromping the trails. And so it has less of an impact. Asa Wright is open daily for visitors. And one of the things that I liked seeing was there was a mixture of local visitors combined with world traveling bird watchers to see the bird life at Asa Wright Nature Center. By the way, you should be aware that every one of the trails either goes up or down. And when you turn around, it does the opposite. So if you want a good little aerobic exercise, that's your place. Or you could sit on the porch and see 50, 60 species right there during the day. In addition, something that warmed my heart was there were a lot of school-age groups that were visiting the Asa Wright Nature Center as part of their studies. I felt that was really encouraging because it builds the next group of people that care deeply about the environment. There were local people staffing the center to serve as guides, and they were great guides. They maintained the feeders, they cooked and served the food, and they operated the center. The dining hall is staffed by the nearby community and served locally sourced foods that reflect the many cultures of Trinidad. The man that is on the left, his name is Dave Davenport, and he is the owner of EcoQuest, and it's a North Carolina-based ecotourism site. I've been with him a lot of different places, and it is heavy on getting out to look at what's there and also respecting the environment and using local guides along with him. And it's just great. And the food was really good, and it was really different. It's unusual to have food that has an Indian, emphasis and a British emphasis, and then some American food. It was really a different food source. Off-site birding trips are staffed by the locally trained guides. Remember the Field Naturalist Club? Those people grew up to be the guides. The group we went with had 6 people, and 2 of the ladies weren't capable of doing a lot of trail walking. They kind of stayed on the porch, and they had a great time. And one guy got sick, so they'd end up being 4 of us and 2 guides. Well, I really like that, because if you're doing tropical birding, it helps the group be small, because if you have a lot of people, some people aren't going to see what everybody else sees. One of the birds that they really make a big deal about is the oilbird. It's a local bird of conservation, and there's a sizable colony found in the Asa Wright at Dunstan Cave, which is about a little over a half-mile down, and only a very limited number of people are able to trek down to the cave each day with a guide. So we're not disturbing them, because these birds come out at night to feed on these date palm and gather the oil to come back and feed their young. The bird's pretty large, and it partly finds its way around by a low frequency echolocation. So here's what an oil bird looks like. Look at the size of the eyes. And they're very careful about how that colony is doing. And when we were there, they were concerned that some animal, probably like a large weasel-like animal called a tetira, was coming in and eating some of the chicks. One of the things, though, that the local culture used to do is the chicks take about 110 days to get out of the nest, because they can't develop that quick, because they're not getting the protein they need to develop quickly. And the natives found that when the oilbird chick got bigger than the adult, they would go and capture them and boil them down for the oil. They actually used the oil. They were that oily. So looking at the Asa Wright Nature Center, they do live into their vision statement. Everything that we talked about, they do. And it really doesn't hurt that there's a research station just down the road. And they continue to put more land in conservation easement. So what are the characteristics of poor ecotourism? Minimal adherence to eco-friendly practices. They're too large to keep from impacting the culture and environment. There's little or no input from the local community. Little educational component. Oftentimes a negative conservation effort. There are no rules for observation of local wildlife, and they encourage artificial interactions with animals. I think if you're using a cane, you shouldn't be touching the rump of a lion. That's just me talking, but good luck. One of the ones that I would highlight is that they have a program called Walk with Lions. And I think a lot of us agree that all the way around, that's a bad idea. And not just safety. It's just not a good idea. Or how about this one? Nothing says nature like having elephants pose for you on a beach so you can take a snapshot home. And this one, I'm not even going to comment on. During the pandemic, we also got to know the Tiger King. And if you watched the show and really paid attention, you found out that in order to maintain that Bengal tiger, you need to make money because they eat so much food. And that means that it quickly turns into a money-making enterprise. And one of the trivia questions is, did you know that there are more tigers in captivity in the United States than there are in the wild in the world? Now, just because a lot of you would like to either relive your trip to Trinidad or you would like to go on one that you maybe wouldn't go on. So I'll take you to some places that we went. We went to the Grand Revere, and then we went to Asa Wright, down to Naviri Swamp, and then over close to the end, we went to the Colonial Bird Sanctuary. And I know I'm not saying Colonial right. I still know how to say it correctly. At the North Shore of the Grand Revere, we got there really late, and it was dark. And when we got up in the morning, one of the things that struck us was the number of turtle eggs on the beach, that we were in the post-breeding time for the turtles to come up, and they really come up in great numbers. And one of the things we saw was a turkey vulture. But notice the southern variety has a pretty good gold yellow patch on the back of the neck. And this one was trying to find out if there was any nutrition left in one of the turtle eggs. But the reason we came is we wanted to see the Trinidad piping guan, a turkey-sized bird that was not too hard to find, but being a bird that's of national significance, there's not a lot of them. And it's hopeful that they're going to encourage getting habitat that would increase their number. We also saw our first channel-billed toucans, and we saw our first Amazonian violaceous trogon and a smooth-billed ani. Then we got to Asa Wright, and we went to see the wattled bellbird. Look at the wattles on that bird. One of the things that I liked about the bird was its call. To me, it sounds like you take an old metal pipe that you use for plumbing, and you'd hit it with a hammer and let it resonate. It sounded just like that to me. And I knew that one bird was about a mile away, and I could clearly hear that distinctive call. We also saw a lot of crested oropendulus and bare-eyed thrush. The oropendulus reminded me of crows in their niche, but they made these like 5-6 foot long hanging nests that reminded me of orioles. The bare-eyed thrush really looks like a variation on our robin. And barred antstrikes, you would hear them. They have this chattering call, and I was putting my boots on one day, and this one came and looked at me for about 15 seconds, and it was lucky I had my camera in my hand at the time. A really nice looking bird. We also saw silver-beaked tanagers, both the male and female. They're pretty sexually dimorphic, aren't they? We saw bay-headed tanagers. We saw palm tanagers. Palm tanagers were just common all over the place. We saw a lot of blue-gray tanagers, and I just like any bird that has that kind of blue. We also saw white-lined tanagers, and the white line shows when he flies. We saw turquoise tanagers high up in the canopy, and this is the best shot we could get. This bird looks like it went to Mardi Gras, doesn't it? And banana quits. I thought a fresh bunch of banana quits would be a way to say it. They really mob the hummingbird feeders, and they like the fruit too. Violaceous euphonias were pretty easy to find. Nice looking bird. There were purple honey creepers, male and female. Both of them were beautiful in their own right. We had green honey creepers, and I was looking at the male, and I thought, I don't know if I'd call that green. And then I realized they might be calling it a green honey creeper because of the female. And she's got a dab of banana hanging out her mouth. And of course, greater kiskadees. We also saw on some of our travels outside of Asa Wright, we saw yellow orioles. And then we started to concentrate on identifying some of the hummingbirds that you see. And all of us were keen on seeing the ruby topaz. So we went down into town to a guy that takes a lot of photographs and had about 25, 30 hummingbird feeders and about 300 or 400 hummingbirds all around. And we got good pictures of a ruby topaz that for days we hadn't seen at Asa Wright. And we came back to Asa Wright that afternoon. And you know what was at the feeder? A ruby topaz. Copper-rumped hummingbirds were the most common. A beautiful bird. Blue-chinned sapphires were not uncommon. along with white-chested emeralds. There were a lot of black-throated mangoes, and for a hummingbird, they were pretty big. Same with the rufous-breasted hermit. But my favorite, because I like crisp colors that contrast, was the white-necked Jacobin. I would say they're 3 or 4 inches long, at least twice as big as a ruby, and pretty interesting. One of the things I read recently is that some of the females will look like males just to keep being harassed. The brown violet ear, nice bird. And everybody wanted to see tufted coquettes. These are not very big birds, but the male is unbelievably colored with these things that stick out of his neck, the crest. Just a beautiful bird, but tiny. And this one in particular, I got a picture of, was deep in a bush. And if you arrange yourself and used a zoom, you could get a pretty decent picture. And the female is on the right. And one of the things I always like about a bird is something that makes the bird stand out. And that band across the rump it shows you it's a coquette. But there were also other animals. It was kind of cool. There would be tons and tons of hummingbirds constantly at the feeders, but as it got just dark enough, the birds would disappear to their roosts for the night and immediately be replaced by fruit bats, 20, 30 of them coming to the hummingbird feeders. And so we didn't stop snapping pictures. We just started snapping pictures of mammals instead of birds. The red agoutis were really common, and the golden tegu was about 4 feet long. And I saw some recently in the Pantanal, and I saw black and white tegus, and they're impressive lizards. On some of our field trips, we saw the rufous-tailed jacamar. It makes a distinctive call, and I remember we walked about a half mile before we found this bird down in a valley, but it was worth the walk. We also saw blue-crowned motmots, which I think have been renamed Trinidad motmots. We also saw lineated woodpeckers, which would remind you of pileated woodpeckers. Interestingly enough, they're really not that closely related. The one that is in South America closely related would be the crimson crested woodpecker. And then the olive green woodpecker, which is a little bit smaller, about the same body shape of a red-bellied woodpecker. There were lots of parrots, and the two that I could get decent pictures of was the orange-winged Amazon and the yellow-crowned Amazon. We went to the Arupi Agricultural Station where they were breeding steers with water buffalo. And that was the only cattle I've ever seen that I wouldn't get into the pen with them. They were huge. We also saw there, though, the northern crested caracara and a pearl kite, not a very big kite, and it was at a distance, but that's a pretty decent picture. We saw a solitary sandpiper, I think you'd agree on that, and white-headed marsh tyrants. We had blue-black grass quits and yellow-chinned spinetail, and just beautiful little birds all over the place. We had Savannah hawks that were pretty common, and we borrowed a picture of a blue-headed parrot that were hard to find, but when you saw them, it was worth the effort. We saw limpkins, and I got a great picture of a wattled chicana. It was only about 5 feet away, didn't care about me. We saw black-crested ant strikes, and one of my favorite, the little cuckoo. I have a bunch of pictures of a cuckoo, but I have not one that shows the entire bird. But even with part of the bird, you can see that it's spectacular. We went to the Colonial wetlands just about the last day we were there, and you get in these fiberglass boats and go down a channel into the swamp. And the guy that leads EcoQuest is Dave Davenport, and he's also a snake expert. And we had a tree boa, so he just reached up and pulled it out and let us, take pictures and talked about the biology of tree boas. We also saw a lot of masked cardinals, which once again, I like those crisp colors, and masked cardinals are something else. We also saw way up in a mangrove tree, a boat-billed heron. Reminds you of a big-billed black-crowned night heron. But notice that the eyes are a lot larger and the bill's enormous, but for their size, they're really shy. And I'm pretty proud of these pictures. We also saw a southern tamandua, and we had one sleeping. It was a great big ball, and there's one that stretches out. It's the easy name for the tamandua is the lesser anteater, and it's very comfortable and very agile in trees. When I was in the Pantanal, we were moving from Campo Grande to Benito, and it was about a 4-hour drive after a day and a half of flights. And they had to do a bathroom break. And I am always half dehydrated when I'm on these trips. So while they were lined up for the bathroom, I went around the back of this gas station, which is in the middle of nowhere, because I saw some red-legged Sariamas and I wanted a good picture. So I had taken a couple pictures. And I realized I hadn't been paying attention to the time. And I knew that the van was full of them waiting for me. And before I left, though, a southern tamandua came out. So I took a picture because I knew it was going to save my bacon. So when I went back to the van with everybody staring at me, I showed the picture on my camera, and the leader says, "Everybody out." And they ended up seeing the tamandua, and I wasn't in trouble. We saw a greater flamingo. I didn't see a lot. This is the one. And the picture we saw with it flying was just a lucky shot. But why were we in the Coroni wetland? Why do natives and people around the world to come, what is it that is really bringing us there? And it's the flocks of scarlet ibis coming in by the hundreds, probably, you know, in the thousands eventually, because they just kept streaming in. And they would land on this island in the middle of the swamp, and it really looked like a Christmas tree. And along with them coming in, there were several other wading birds, prominently the snowy egrets came in really large numbers. And I don't want to end on a downer because it's a little downer, but due to the COVID pandemic, the Asa Wright Center has been closed to visitors for several months, and the Eco Lodge has permanently ceased operations. However, the not-for-profit trust remains in existence and will continue managing its protected areas as a wildlife sanctuary. And I was on the website recently, and they're advertising for a group that will come and operate the center. I think the reason why, there were two reasons why the center had to shut down during the pandemic. Its small size meant that it wasn't making a large profit. There wasn't a lot of money that would just sit there to pay the workers and keep the doors open until they could start having visitors again. And I also think that the way they have structured unions down in Trinidad made it difficult for them to work a deal. And so that's why they permanently cease. But I'm really hoping that eventually there's a vendor that will open it back up, as you know, and work a profit, but still stay within the good ecotourism that Asa Wright is. Because I always say staying at Asa Wright is like this. If you're studying George Washington and you have an opportunity to stay at Mount Vernon, but it closed and you have to stay down the road at a Fairfield Inn, it's okay, but it's not the same. And I hope that, I know this club, some of you are planning to go to Asa Wright and you just missed the cut. I'm hoping that eventually in the future, you'll be able to go. But if you're thinking about birding Trinidad, there are several ecotourism companies that still go to Trinidad. I'd recommend that you wait until Trinidad gets a better handle on the virus, because they don't yet have that. And like, for example, I know a company I've used called Naturalist Journeys. It is already running trips. And George told me about Calico Travel. They can also set up really nice trips. Well, the last slide I have here is that if you're a book reader, The Old House and the Dream, it's a really nicely written story about the history of the plantation and the relationship that the scientists and illustrators built up with Asa Wright. And then they actually turned it into a nonprofit while Asa Wright was still there. And there were a couple really tough years because Asa Wright had her own idea that how she would run the center, but it's a really good book. And I'm hoping that there's a new chapter that talks about coming out from underneath the pandemic. So that's the end of my talk. I'll stop the share, and you could unmute yourselves if you want to ask me questions.
Larry, thanks so much. That was incredible. And I'm glad you had the pictures of the oil bird. That of all the birds that I have on my list of, wanting to go to Asa Wright or to Trinidad, that's top of the list. It's just such a mysterious, almost mythical type of bird down there.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for sharing all that and the information about current status of Asa Wright. I don't know. It seems like maybe there's an opportunity for some bird clubs around the country to get together and kind of do something about that and run this thing.
Yeah, I know that originally it was the New York Zoological Society that had a lot of influence at Asa Wright. But one of the things they did, which I thought was a really good one, is as Americans, we have to be really careful that it is that the support and the direction is guided by the people that live in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that. And I actually think that was part of the reason why they had this shutdown for a while, that they're closer to the problem than we are.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great model for sustainability and, getting buy-in from everybody that lives around there.
Yeah. Well, if Asa Wright, of course, is not the only ecological sensitive ecotourism group. I just got back from the Pantanal, and when you went to the haciendas, like I went to the one San Francisco and a couple others, they're working ranches and they're also rice farmers. And they found out that along with raising cattle and rice, that if they encouraged the right kind of habitat, it would attract jaguars and caimans and capybaras. And so the jaguars, instead of attacking the cattle, would eat what they normally eat, capybaras and caimans, and they can supplement their income by having a lot of people come and go on buggy rides around seeing the wildlife. And, one of the things that I really like was they did a lot of night drives. And I've always wanted to see an ocelot, and we saw an ocelot for a half an hour. And our guide particularly did not encourage us seeing jaguars early, because we went down to Porto Joffre at the end of the Transpantanera Highway and went up on a boat and stayed near where the jaguars were, and they were all over the place. But these are places where money comes in and it supplements what they're already doing while they're there.
Larry, can you comment on the Pantanal? Great photos, by the way, of Asa Wright. Thank you. Can you comment on the Pantanal? You mentioned earlier in passing, they're in serious drought and also facing pandemic issues in Brazil, as we've all read about. Can you just comment on birding down there now? Is it better or worse?
Well, I don't have I haven't been twice, but I think I picked up another 300 life birds, which is pretty good because I have a fair amount of South American experience. The birding was pretty good, but if you're going, Lloyd, have you gone down the Transpantanera Highway?
It was some years ago that we did our Pantanal trip, but it was in the dry season and we found it extraordinarily wet.
Yes. And that's because it still pools along the roads. Well, this 50-year drought, there weren't a lot of pools. And you'd see and smell caiman. There'd be 1,000 in a pond that wasn't bigger than one of the ponds at Kinder Park.
Oh,
And
wow.
pretty shallow, and they'd already eaten out the fish, and what they were doing is eating each other. I have a
Right.
picture of a caiman that is just pulled in on the sides and its eyes are sunk, and I think it's going to be one of the next meals. I'm hoping that we're not looking at a climate shift and that this continues. When it comes to the Pantanal, all the people we met had been vaccinated, that even though they didn't do a great job of first vaccinating. I did notice in the cities, they had billboards up about their vaccination rates, and people were wearing masks all over the place, just walking down the road wearing a mask. And all the people we came into contact with had been vaccinated. And when we came back, we have to do a test to come back.
Right.
And we tested negative, except for one person, which meant he had to stay until he tested negative. And it turned out about 3 days later, they determined that he had had a false positive
Mhm.
and was able to come home. But he had a story to tell,
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It sounds like maybe the accessibility to bird spots is easier with the dryness,
Yeah. We saw some unusual things. And one of the things I like to do when I'm in a natural areas, I make sure that I pay attention to the smells. And some of them are real fragrant. Some of them are rotting vegetation. But some of the places you could smell death, because it had gotten that dry. We saw some river otters, the big ones. And they were in an area where we didn't know where the water was. But the guides assured me that those river otters could get to the next water source and they knew where it was. But the caimans there, unless there was some rain coming, I don't think it was going to come soon. There were going to be ponds where just about every caiman there was going to be gone.
Yeah.
But if caimans, they also reproduce tremendously. And if there isn't a lot of big ones eating the little ones, they can bounce back pretty quick. If you live in Florida, you know that with alligators.
Right.
And caimans really are alligators.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, invite me back when you're not tired of me talking. And I have fantastic pictures of the bird life and animal life down there. We were down there 18 days and it was pretty good. Not pretty good. It was fantastic.
Love to hear it.
Yeah.
Larry,
Yes.
my first bird when I came out on the porch there was hawk eagle. Did you get to see that?
You mean the ornate hawk eagle?
Yes.
You're bringing that up because I didn't see that bird.
That was the
there
first
was
bird.
somebody that stayed at the porch that was there in an afternoon when one came in for a half an hour. And about 5 minutes before we got back, it flew away. But there are some really nice birds of prey down there. I was more impressed with the hummingbirds, the parrots, the toucans, all the different shrikes. And, one of the things I like about birding is, don't you like going someplace and you see a pearly-throated toady tyrant? And, their names are just so much fun to say. Yeah, really nice place. And I like the fact that it had a history. It wasn't just a new building and a great place to go, but it had a history. And that's one of the things I liked about the Pantanal is that the people there are making a living and supplementing it with ecotourism, which is win-win, because, even here in the United States, there are a lot of small farmers that do a lot of different things to make ends meet. And one of the ways they were doing it was just having to say, yeah, we'll drive you around at night, I love that. We had a lot of barn owls, scissor-tailed nightjars, wow, what a bird. And one of the birds we saw was the great potu.
Right.
I never thought I'd see that bird, but it's fantastic. It's huge too. Any questions about Asa Wright? How many have been there? George, I know Dick's gone.
If you haven't gone, you got to go. That's a must place to go.
Yeah. And it's not just the birds, there's lots of things to see. The culture is really interesting. The street food's a real challenge to eat without getting it all over you. All right. It's been nice to see the names and faces, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Larry, thanks
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
And
Yeah.
sounds like you have a few programs we might be interested in down the road.
Oh, yeah.
So we may be inviting you back.
Good to see you, Larry.
Good to see you, Kim.
Thanks, Larry.
Same
Oh,
here.
you're welcome, Lynn. Nice to see you guys looking so healthy.
Thank you.
Hey,
But else-
uh,
You must have a
Pat,
fuzzy
you
picture.
Yeah.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah. My best to Jeff when you see him.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I talk to him all the time, but I don't see him because this pandemic thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'll see him in December.
Yeah, he's like our Gerald Weingrad. He's running the program, and we don't close down during the summer. We have 12 programs a year.
Oh, wow.
And he has so many contacts, just like Gerald did, that we get really good speakers, just fantastic. And we're looking forward to meeting in person. We're hoping January, February. We know it's not right away. We meet in one of the museums downtown. Really good facility, 3 big screens, so we can have 100 people and it's not crowded. It's really nice.